Frank Rodriguez had been working on cars since he was 16, but he'd never seen anything like what was under the hood of the blue sedan. The damage was too systematic, too purposeful to be accidental. As he traced the severed wires and contaminated fluids, muscle memory from another life kicked in. 20 years ago, in places he didn't talk about, he'd learned to recognize the signature of someone trying to eliminate a target through mechanical failure. The blue 2019 Honda Civic had been towed to Miller's auto shop on a Wednesday morning with what the owner, Margaret Chen, described as strange noises and brake problems. Frank, who worked the early shift at the small-town garage, was assigned to diagnose the issue. At 52, Frank had weathered hands of someone who'd spent decades working with tools, though his colleagues often remarked that his techniques seemed unusually precise for someone who'd learned mechanics on the job. He kept to himself mostly, arriving early, staying late, and turning out consistently excellent work that kept customers coming back. "Just do a standard inspection," said Mike Miller, the shop owner. "Lady says the brakes feel spongy, and there's a grinding noise from the engine." As he raised the car on the lift and began his inspection, something felt wrong. He'd been working at Miller's for 4 years now, ever since moving to Cedar Falls. It was quiet work, honest work, and it let him use his hands while keeping his mind occupied with problems that had clear solutions. But today was different. The brake lines showed signs of deliberate scoring, tiny cuts that would weaken the metal gradually until complete failure occurred, likely at highway speeds. Frank's trained, I immediately recognized the pattern. This wasn't wear from age or road debris. This was sabotage. His hands moved automatically, following inspection protocols he hadn't used in 20 years. Check the oil, contaminated with metal shavings that would destroy the engine within 50 miles. Examine the steering fluid, sand mixed in to cause catastrophic failure during turns. Inspect the tire valve stems, loosened just enough to cause slow leaks leading to blowouts at high speed. This was textbook vehicle elimination technique, designed to look like mechanical failure while ensuring the target's death. Frank's pulse quickened. Margaret Chen was a prosecutor. Someone wanted her dead. "Find anything yet, Frank?" called Tony from Bay 2. "Still looking," Frank replied steadily. Frank made a decision that would expose skills he'd kept hidden for 4 years. Mike Miller walked over, coffee mug in hand, expecting another routine repair estimate. What he found was Frank Rodriguez standing beside the Honda with the expression of someone who discovered a bomb. "Mike," he called his boss, "I need you to see something. This car has been sabotaged." Mike Miller looked skeptical. "Frank, come on. Cars break down. That's why we're in business. Look at these cuts." Frank pointed to the brake lines. "These are deliberate." And here, he showed Mike the contaminated fluids. Someone wanted this car to fail catastrophically. Mike examined the evidence Frank was showing him, but all he saw was a car with multiple problems. "I don't know, Frank. Maybe the lady just hasn't maintained it properly." This is attempted murder. The certainty in Frank's voice, the precision with which he'd identified each point of sabotage, and the speed with which he'd diagnosed problems that should have taken hours to find made Mike pause. "How can you be so sure?" Frank hesitated. "Because I've seen this before. This is military-grade sabotage technique." "Military?" Mike stared at his quiet employee. Before Frank could answer, Margaret Chen walked into the shop. "Is my Honda ready?" she asked. Frank looked at her. Young, professional, probably had no idea how close she'd come to dying. "Ms. Chen, your car has been deliberately tampered with. Someone tried to kill you." Margaret's face went pale. "That's impossible. Ma'am, your brake lines have been cut to fail at highway speeds. Your oil contains metal shavings. Your steering fluid has sand. This is professional sabotage designed to cause multiple failures." "How do you know all this?" Frank looked at Mike, then Margaret. "Because 20 years ago, I was trained to do exactly this kind of work." The garage fell silent. "What kind of work?" Margaret pressed. "Covert vehicle sabotage. Target elimination through mechanical failure. Army Special Operations, 1995 to 2015. This is textbook, if you know what to look for." Mike's coffee mug shattered on concrete. "Frank, you told me you learned mechanics in civilian world. I wanted to fix cars, not destroy them. I wanted a quiet life where the most dangerous thing was a faulty alternator. Margaret was calling police. If someone's trying to kill me, it's related to a case. Within an hour, Detective Morrison and FBI agents arrived. Frank walked them. This level of analysis is impressive, the FBI agent said. Can you think of anyone else with similar skills? Frank studied the sabotage. Whoever did this is skilled, but made mistakes another professional would notice. Margaret returned from calls looking shaken. My supervisor thinks this relates to the Castellano case. We're prosecuting organized crime. Trial starts next week. That makes sense, Frank said. This is exactly what you'd use to eliminate a prosecutor before trial. Mr. Rodriguez, would you consult on this case? Detective Morrison asked. Frank looked around his sanctuary garage. His quiet life was over. I'll help, but I'm a mechanic now, not a soldier. I fix things, I don't break them. The investigation revealed Margaret had been targeted by the crime family she was prosecuting. The sabotage was carried out by someone with military training similar to Frank's background. How did you spot it so fast? Margaret asked when she came to thank him. Frank wiped his hands on a rag. You learn to see things differently when you've been trained to create problems and solve them. I spent 20 years learning how vehicles fail. Now, I learn how to make them work. I'm alive because you couldn't turn off the soldier completely. Frank smiled. Maybe I'm just a mechanic who paid attention during unusual training courses. Mike shook his head. For years, you never mentioned being military expert. Why? Because I wasn't trying to be an expert anymore. I was trying to be useful in a different way. Sometimes your old life catches up when someone needs help. The Castellano trial proceeded without incident. Frank's analysis helped prosecutors demonstrate the crime family's desperation to obstruct justice plot. Customers brought vehicles for security inspections. Police consulted him on suspicious accidents. Looks like you've got a new specialty, Mike observed. I just want to fix cars, Frank replied, though he felt satisfaction using specialized knowledge to help people. That evening, Tony approached him. All those times you seemed to know exactly what was wrong before diagnostics. That was military training. Frank considered. When you train to understand system failures, you recognize patterns. Whether it's a Humvee in Afghanistan or Honda in Cedar Falls, problems follow predictable patterns. That's like having superpowers for car repair. Frank smiled. Not superpowers. Experience. The trick is knowing when to use what you've learned. But you're glad you remembered when it mattered? Frank looked at a photo on his workbench. Margaret Chen with her family at a barbecue, alive because he'd recognized assassination signatures. Yeah, I'm glad I remembered. Locking up that night, Frank reflected on how his two worlds had intersected to save a life. For 20 years, he'd served his country through destruction. Now he used those skills to serve his community through protection. It wasn't the quiet retirement he'd planned, but Frank realized the most important service comes from using all your abilities when life depends on it. Margaret Chen was alive, Vincent Castellano was in prison, and Frank Rodriguez was still a small-town mechanic. But now he was a mechanic whose specialized skills made his community safer. For a soldier turned civilian, that felt like the perfect mission.